All right, welcome. We're jumping right into a topic that's not just a part of pastoral care, it's really at the absolute heart of it. We're talking about God's call to care for the weak and the vulnerable. In our study of shepherding, you'll find that few things are more central to God's own character, and today we're going to unpack what that actually means for us in ministry.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to start with the why, the solid biblical foundation for all of this. Then we'll get practical and talk about the who. How do we even identify the vulnerable people around us? From there, we'll get into the how, a framework for helping that actually empowers people. And finally, we'll end with the really exciting part, the what if, with some incredible stories of what happens when people just say yes to this calling.
Okay, let's dive in. We have to start right here with the theological foundation, because caring for the vulnerable isn't just a nice social program or a good idea for a ministry. It's actually rooted in the very character of God himself. I mean, look at what James writes here. He puts this kind of ministry front and center. He doesn't say it's part of pure religion. He says it is pure religion. This isn't some optional add-on program for the church. According to James, it's a core expression of what it means to actually live out our faith. And this isn't just a one-off verse. This theme is woven through the entire story of the Bible. The psalmist says God's very character is to be a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. In the law, he commands his people to provide for them. And then you see the early church. In its very first crisis, what do? They appoint deacons specifically so that the widows wouldn't be neglected. Paul even gives Timothy super detailed instructions on how to keep this priority going. It's a consistent, unchanging command from start to finish. So here's the bottom line. When we engage in this work, we're doing so much more than just meeting a need. We are reflecting the very heart of our Father. This is a non-negotiable part of our calling, both as shepherds and just as the people of God. All right, let's move on. With that theological foundation set, the question becomes really practical, right? Who are we actually looking for? How do we start to identify the people who need this kind of care in our own communities right now?
Okay, this concept, we have to get our heads around this. Vulnerability. This is the condition that exploiters, like human traffickers, are actively looking for. It's not random. They are literally scanning the landscape for people with unmet needs, because those needs create an opening for them to come in and offer a false, destructive solution.
And this is where it gets really personal for us as pastors and church leaders. We have to constantly be asking this question. The Bible uses these specific labels, widow, orphan, foreigner, but they all point to a timeless condition. The faces change, the circumstances are different than ancient Israel, but that underlying reality of vulnerability, it's exactly the same. So who might this be today? Well, it could be the person who's unemployed, the single parent trying to do it all on their own, the refugee who has no support system. It definitely includes those with disabilities, mental illness, or a history of trauma. And what's so important to see is how these things overlap. A person is rarely just one of these. They might be a refugee who is also a single mother and a survivor of trauma. Each layer just adds to their vulnerability and often makes them even more hidden from the rest of us. I love this quote. That phrase, hidden in plain sight. Just think about that for a second. Vulnerable people are often invisible to us precisely because they're vulnerable. They don't have the power or the money or the status to make themselves seen. It's so easy for us to just look right past them. So what does that mean for us? It means our first pastoral duty, our first job in this area is simply to look. We have to actively fight that natural human tendency, the one James chapter 2 warns us about, to only pay attention to the well-dressed and the powerful. We have to intentionally train our eyes and our hearts to see those who are in the margins.
All right, so knowing who to look for is the first step. But this next part, this is absolutely critical. We have to know how to help in a way that truly empowers people and restores their God-given dignity, instead of accidentally creating an unhealthy dependency.
And this chart just illustrates the difference so brilliantly. On one hand, you have ineffective help. It's all about handouts, treating people like projects, and only dealing with the symptoms, like hunger. And what's crazy is that it measures success by how many people stay dependent on the program. But effective help, it's totally different. It starts with dignity. It asks the deeper question, why is this person hungry? And it creates pathways for them to provide for themselves. Its whole goal is to work itself out of a job.
So, what does this actually look like on the ground? Well, here are a few great examples. Microenterprise, for instance. That's basically giving someone a small loan, maybe $100, so they can buy a sewing machine and start a tailoring business.
The goal is sustainable income. Or it could be vocational training and skills that are actually in demand in your city. Or just building relationships with local businesses to help people find jobs. See, it's all about long-term empowerment.
But honestly, it's not all about big programs. At its core, this ministry is about relationships. And this simple 5-step framework is so powerful. It starts where we started. Look, open your eyes. But then it moves to something crucial. Listen, don't just show up assuming you have the solution. Take the time to hear their actual story. Let them tell you what they need. From there, you can start to really understand and develop empathy. Then you pray, for them and even better, with them. And only then, as God leads, do you move to meet needs in practical ways.
And James brings it all home for us, doesn't he? Faith without works is dead. It's not enough to offer spiritual-sounding words. We can't just say, hey, go in peace, hope you get warm and find some food, while doing nothing to provide the coat or the meal they actually need. Our care has to be tangible, practical, and sacrificial.
Okay, this is my favorite part, because all of this can start to feel, well, a little overwhelming, right? So I want to show you what actually happens when ordinary people, without some grand strategy, simply say yes to God's call and show up for the vulnerable.
First, I want you to meet Pumarine. She was a Thai language teacher living a pretty comfortable life. But after hearing about God's heart for the poor, she felt this deep conviction. And she had this one simple problem. She realized she didn't even know where the poor people were in her own city. So she just started looking. And she found this community of outcasts called the Dirt Wall Village. She didn't have a big plan or a budget. She just started showing up, building relationships, teaching English. And as she did that, she noticed the children's lack of education made them incredibly vulnerable to being trafficked. So she started a simple scholarship program. And the result? It's just astonishing. Every single child she helped graduated high school. And get this, not a single one was trafficked, in a place where it used to be common. Then there's Boom Mosby. She had a degree in English literature. That's it. No training in social work, no background in law enforcement. But she felt this unmistakable call from God to help abused children. So she just started learning, shadowing people who were already doing the work. And her whole approach, her whole mindset was one of humble service. Listen to this. She said her goal was to fill in the gaps for the police and ultimately to work herself out of a job. It wasn't about building her own brand or being the hero. It was about making the existing system better.
So she started small by organizing soccer games to build trust between the police and street kids. But then she witnessed a really traumatic interview of a child victim, and it gave her an idea. She brought what's called the Child Advocacy Center model to Thailand, creating safe, kid-friendly spaces for interviews. That one simple idea completely revolutionized police protocols, led to a huge spike in trafficking convictions, and ultimately changed the whole nation's approach to protecting children.
And finally, Ashley Lee. Her story is, wow. She was a corporate project manager in the US, climbing the career ladder, doing all the right things, and then at a conference, she felt God speak 3 words to her, clear as day. Thailand, trafficking, go. And she knew almost nothing about any of those 3 things.
So, with no plan other than just simple obedience, she and her family packed up and moved to Thailand. When the COVID pandemic hit and everything shut down, she started with this one tiny act of service, bringing 10 bags of food to women who were literally starving in the city's red light district. And that simple act of love just grew and grew. The food led to relationships, the relationships led to opening a community center. And today, that center is this beacon of hope, and just recently, 14 women were baptized there.
So as we look at these 3 amazing women, you start to see a pattern, don't you? What are the common threads? First, none of them started with some brilliant master plan. They all just began with a single, small step of obedience. Second, they all combined practical, tangible help with the spiritual hope of the gospel. And finally, they were just faithful with what little they had in their hands, and they trusted God to bring the results.
You know, it is so easy to look at the massive scale of need in the world and feel exactly like the disciples did when they were facing that huge, hungry crowd. We look at what we have, our time, our money, our skills, and we just say, but what is this among so many? It feels completely insignificant.
But these stories, they show us that's the wrong question. The real question isn't whether one person can make a difference. The question for every single one of us is this: what has God placed in front of you? What are your 5 loaves and 2 fish? What is that small thing? A bag of food,
an hour of your time, just a listening ear, that you can offer in faith, trusting that Jesus is the one who does the multiplying.